Welcome back to Rich Dad Stockcast. I'm your host, Del Denney, and today we're diving into a topic that can amplify your wealth or wipe you out if you don't understand it: margin, leverage, and your personal risk appetite. Used properly, leverage can be a powerful tool. Used recklessly, it's a ticking time bomb. And who better to break this down than Rich Dad expert Andy Tanner, who teaches everyday investors how to manage risk and use leverage the right way. Now, before we get started, head over to stockcastbonus.com, grab your free tools, whether you're trading with cash or using margins. These resources will help you to become a more informed investor. Andy, it's always great to have you. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show.
You know, this is a this is a topic that is so important, man. I often speak about 4 pillars of investing. You know, the ability to do what's called a fundamental analysis and analyze an opportunity, right? There's just certain fundamental things that show a healthy opportunity or an anemic one. Technical analysis about trends and where markets are at. That's just data. You know, nothing we can do to change either of those, but we do want to learn from them. Where we can start to begin to manipulate things is positioning with cash flow, which is the third pillar. So you got fundamentals, technicals, cash flow. But the fourth pillar is the most important, is the capstone and foundation at the same time. It saturates everything we do. It is the premier skill of an investor. You know, Robert says the number one skill of an entrepreneur is raising capital. I would say the number one skill of an investor is risk management, is the ability to manage and have a plan for when things go sideways, because they do and will continue. So this topic of using this stuff and managing the increased risks with inherent to it this is not Pee-wee, Pop Warner. This is the freaking NFL and the major leagues to be able to do this. So this is cool.
I'm excited already because you're dropping gems already before we even got started here. But to back the train up a little bit, stockcastbonus.com, amazing tools and resources, not just for the beginner investor and also the seasoned investor, but for those that are just new to the channel. What do they receive when they go to stockcastbonus.com?
Yeah, the best way to know is to go and find out. It's so interesting that people cut off their nose to spite their face. I'm a very empathetic guy naturally. My friends often say, Andy, as soon as someone has a problem, it becomes your problem, and by nature, I care about people. I'm kind of live my life emotionally too much in high definition. And when emotion goes up and IQ goes down, so that explains a lot of problems. So I am empathetic for people, but I do struggle with people that complain about not being where they want to be, or wealth gaps, or blah, blah, blah. Because I say, well, what are you doing about it? Yeah, maybe you're a victim. Maybe you've had some bad run of luck, but what are you doing about it? And there are so many ways to begin to put one foot in front of the other for free. And some people will say, Andy, how much money can I really make investing before they'll try? And I go, well, the best way to find out is let's find out. My son, when he was young, said, Dad, if I work hard, will I make the basketball team? I said, well, let's find out. Let's put in the work. That's the way to find out. There's no way to know until we do the work. So what are you going to get at fatcashflowbonus.com? Go find out. Go there, see. But I'll tell you what you'll get. You'll get great tools. A lot of them are for no charge. We understand that some people are starting at square one. Well, we're not going to have you win the lottery. That's not likely. The problem isn't a lack of money. It is a lack of knowledge. If you think about it, is it because you just don't have any money? Or you don't know how to get it? And there has to be a first step available for someone who's starting at square one, or someone who's doing well and wants to go next level. It's always why or how, what do I need to learn? So Stockcast Bonus is a place to start learning and doing and implementing. And tell us about you. It allows you to get in touch with us. It allows you to communicate with us and tell us who you are. And once we know that, we can begin to help you. So that's a big deal.
There we go. All right. So our topic today, margin and leverage, they sound like shortcuts to get rich faster, but what do people completely misunderstand about them? Let's start with that.
Well, there's a couple of we talked about some rules of money in the previous podcast, and this really actually is a great continuation of that. One of the most important principles in investing is something called infinite return. Instead of going for 5% or 3% or, point whatever you get at the bank a few years ago, 1-2%. How do you get infinite ROI and infinite return? That doesn't mean an infinite amount of money. There's only so much money in the world, $7 trillion or whatever's out there in the world. But it's the rate of return that increases. So that's the first principle. The second principle is leverage. And when people hear the word leverage, they might run away from it because they say, well, that's risky. Well, that's why we have a risk pillar. That's why we have a risk management pillar. So all margin and debt and all these other things you spoke about, what that really is a lever. And there's a saying, it says, give me a lever large enough and I can move the world. So let's go bigger picture. I can hear Robert in my mind's eye saying, Andy, don't go small, keep it big. So let's expand this idea. With great power comes great responsibility. And if you look at let's leave the financial markets for a minute and let's talk about tremendous power. So let's talk about, we could talk about politics, religion, and sex. We can talk about those things. I think I'll stay away from politics and religion. So let's talk about sex for a minute. It was really, really hard for Marcy and I to sire a child. I had testicular cancer and she had problems. We were pretty old when we had our son, and the technology we had to employ it actually didn't exist when we were trying to have children. We had to wait for technology to catch up to do that. And I remember we had flown down to Southern California. We found the best guy in the world, gave him all our money because we wanted a kid. And we found the best guy in the world, and we tried and tried and tried. And finally, on one particular trip down there, everything was done by mail. I mean, we got all these cells and embryos going by mail. And it was time to, we finally had a viable embryo. Finally had one. It was frozen in liquid nitrogen for a few weeks to get Marcy's body rebooted where she could accept that embryo and hopefully have it grow within her womb. Get all emotional when I talk about this. And I remember going down there where they were going to implant this embryo, and Marcy's getting prepped, and it wasn't a doctor, this is a scientist, a PhD guy, and we're going to put this in. And he goes, look in here. And I look in the microscope, and there's my son, 8 cells. And, I can't think of a power that is more universally given to mankind than the power to create a human. And that's real power. And with that power comes great responsibility. I mean, in that moment, I'd always want to be a father, but man, I really felt the weight like I'm in charge of somebody now. That's within my charge. And you just don't want to mess with that. I've seen people that abuse that power and don't use it with the right way. And in a way, a lot of people teach their kids that, the intimacy that can exist between humans is a dirty, nasty, sinful, awful, dirty, nasty thing. It's not. It's a beautiful thing when two people can come together in that bond and do that. When would you be more like God than when you participate in creating a human being? That's sobering, right? So you don't say, oh, this is a nasty power. I think that people do their kids a disservice when they say this is awful, this is nasty. It's not. It's a beautiful thing. It's not an ugly thing. So when you have great power, it's about education, knowing what it can do, and appreciating that power, if that makes sense. Now let's talk about fire. Is fire good or bad? It's a great question. Yeah, it is. It can heat your house. It can light your way. It can cook your food. It can warm your body. If you're in the mountains and it's snowing, you're like REO Speedwagon, you got to ride the storm out. I would hope that the little Boy Scout skills that I learned with flint and steel, or any other way. I mean, how do you build a fire in 5 feet of snow? Well, you got to know where to find the dead wood that's dry under the pines, right? You've got to know how to find dry places, and you've got to have skill, because that fire will save your life. Fire is a life-saving skill. A lot of people burned up in a fire. So fire can preserve life and it can take life. Does that mean we play with fire? No. In the Scouts, we call it firecraft, the ability to make a fire in several ways. So this is where I part ways with Dave Ramsey just vehemently. I mean, I think he's just way, way off, because he's like keep hearing that. He's like Frankenstein, oh, fire bad, oh, fire, and low level IQ on that, really low level IQ. To say we should never use fire because it can burn you, that's crazy. Master these things, right? Master these things. We don't run from them, we master them. So now we move, to more finance and debt. And it's just a lot of power. So it can light your way, and it can chew you up. So here's the thing with debt and margin and leverage. In real estate, it's debt. There's lots of different ways to use leverage in the stock and options market. Debt's one of them. Margin. Some people say you can't borrow money against stocks. That's not true. You don't even have to fill out an application other than just getting your account. As soon as that margin's enabled, you pretty much have one-to-one leverage, which doubles your risk and doubles your return. So immediately you're doubling your opportunity out of the gate. I don't use a lot of margin. I don't like it. I stay away from that generally, not because I would be afraid of it, but because the options market just gives us better, for lack of a better word, options for that debt. But so the first step to understanding this, and we'll drill down a little bit deeper as we go through the discussion. But the first one is to understand that general principle is that power is to be learned about, bridled, and channeled, not run from, simply because the abuse of that power. I'm going to create lives. I've created 2 of them with my wife's help. That's a positive. It's the most important thing I've ever done. Most important thing I've ever done is to raise those 2 kids with my wife. The most important work I've ever done has been inside my own home. I've learned how to build a fire, and I cook my pizzas with it regularly in my pizza oven. And I've learned a lot about the leverage of debt. So it's just power. That's all it is. So you have to ask yourself, if there's power available, do I learn about it? Well, when I look at the numbers, Vanguard came out with their How America Saves, and the median balance of a 401k for age 54 to 65 is less than $100,000. You can't get through retirement with less than $100,000. So there you are at 54. What do? Well, you can work the rest of your life and say, give up on retirement. And that's kind of like if you're Dave Ramsey, he'd wag his finger. You say, well, see, you should have done, everyone should look at this guy and how he screwed up and learn from him, you young people. What does that do for him? Nothing. So many, many people, if they want to preserve their dreams, will have to employ some leverage. Now, think about this. Let's just take the first rental property I ever bought, 1,000 years ago. One house bought with debt, right? I used leverage to do it. It was a zero money out of my own pocket. Zero. We raised the equity and the debt both. That thing right there, I look at someone like my folks who retired and what a blessing that would be if they had just one, let alone several of these, right? And how do you accumulate a lot of assets? Do you know how long it would take me to save? Just look at the real estate that I own. You know how long it take me to save to buy all those properties? It's
Forever.
lifetimes. You'd have never done it, because as long as it takes you to save, the prices are going up. It's a game you can't catch up to. Well, the same is true with stocks. Is I'm going to get paid to buy them, first of all, and I'm going to get paid to sell them, second of all, and I'm going to collect the dividends in between. but there's also opportunities for leverage there without any debt. Right now, with AI coming on and the boom, I think there's going to be a bust first, and the prices will drop and the premiums will be rich. And then I think there's going to be the biggest boom we've ever seen. And between that bust and that boom, if you're 55, if you really want to learn it, you've got to learn to use leverage responsibly. So that's the first thing I would say from a big picture. And when we come back from break, I'll show you some real more detail. Then we'll get granular after big picture. We've got to establish the big picture. It's power not to be shunned or run away from or have some silly, Dave Ramsey type of freaking rule that says don't go into debt. Baloney. I have no wealth without debt, Dave. I don't sit where I sit if I don't learn about debt and handling it right. I don't have what I have without leverage. And the same is true with stocks. So the first person, you got to get over that debt is bad thing. It's not. It's the right hand, left hand. It's not right hand, wrong hand. It's right hand, left hand. That's it. So there you have that. And we can talk more about that after the break.
Well, let's do that. Let's go to break. We've just unpacked what leverage really is, why it's so dangerous in the wrong hands. It's power. But now let's flip it. When we come back, Andy's going to share how to use leverage and margin responsibly, how to match it with your true risk appetite. And don't forget, go to stockcastbonus.com, download your free tools. If you're even thinking about margin or leverage, you need a system to do it wisely. So stick around. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it, and it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And they're not just trying to sell you something, they really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
Welcome back to Rich Dad Stockcast. We're talking about how to approach margin and leverage with strategy, not emotion. So let's get tactical here. So how can an investor assess their real risk appetite? Like, what question should someone ask before they use leverage or start taking on leverage?
Well, obviously, it goes without saying is there's an education in your process. You've got to have a process that works. So let's look at casinos for a minute. They have rules that are just unbreakable. They don't break the rules. And one of the things they use to protect themselves, first of all, they have this system that will generate cash for them more often than not. So then you got to look at the flaws in that system. And one of them is position sizing. So there's this thing called martingaling where you could go to a casino and just keep doubling down until you win. And eventually you'd win. Eventually you would win. So what they do is they say, look, we have to have a limit on the size of bet. That's called position sizing. So if you're taking notes, write that down. The number one most important thing, if you're going to get more aggressive, is the size of that position. I'd say that's rule number one. Corey Halliday, I've had three great mentors. Learned a lot about risk, but the three greatest are Buffett, Kiyosaki, and Corey Halliday. And Corey's trained, a zillion people, and he was a Series 4 option principal. He was the risk manager at the Wall Street firm that managed hundreds of traders at the time. And one of the things he teaches, and this is really a good lesson after our previous podcast, is we do not position size to reward. We position size to risk. Now, let me explain what that means. We look at what we want to have in cash flow, and we want to get out of the rat race. So that's reward, right? I want to make enough money where I can quit a job, someone says, right? I don't want a job. I want more money. So they'll say, all right, I need a house payment of, $3,000 a month, whatever their house payment might be. So what they start to do is use leverage and go big enough to where that reward pays the house payment without considering the risks that are there. So here's the first thing. You always position size to the risk, not to the reward. So let's say I'm in the options market and I'm going to do a credit trade that pays me for the month, where I click and get paid. Well, maybe this guy says, oh, I want $3,000 a month to pay my house payment, so I'm going to sell enough options to pay my house payment. That would be position sizing to reward. But what we really want to do is look at what could go wrong and position size to that. So that would be the number one thing detailed. If you're going to use margin, or if you're going to use a levered instrument like a future, you're going to position size to risk. My son's off at college, and it was really funny because this is rare. One of his teammates on the basketball team trades. So they got two kids on that team that know how to trade. So they're talking shop, and this kid trades, he trades futures. It's very, 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 very important for him to position size. That's 50-to-1 leverage. There's no debt, but there's 51 leverage that can bite you if it goes the other way. Well, if you're at 50-to-1, that can make you rich really, really quick and make you poor really, really quick. So now we don't want to play with fire. We want to do firecraft. If you play with fire, you'll get burned. If you master fire, you'll cook your food, fight off the bear, heat your house, light your way. It is so important to know these little things, because if you're 55, you're 60, or even your 40s, and you're not on track, it's not going bigger, it's going faster. So leverage doesn't mean we go bigger with position size. It means we go faster. It means we compound better. So I would say the number one thing on my list when we go from a big picture to a more granular one, especially in stocks, is position size. And the same is true. I remember Grant Cardone was with Robert Kiyosaki on a podcast, and Robert all but threw him out of the studio because Grant was talking about having people do, $1 million projects in their first deal. And that's Grant. He wants everyone to think, rich and all this crap. But Robert's like, no, you start with a duplex, start small. Same leverage using debt, but position size a little bit smaller, but go faster. All that. So in real estate, you buy the duplex faster if you use debt than saving up for it. So it's speed. You get the assets sooner with the speed, but you don't position size to where you're out of your freaking mind, because there's a learning process to it, and you walk before you crawl. And once you get a duplex, then okay, I kind of get this. Now maybe I'm ready for a fourplex. But you position size to your risk, not to your rewards. And that's huge when it comes to margin. There's a saying Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, you're going to find out who's swimming naked. Well, the people that have over position sized and over leveraged, you can have too much fire. You can have too much sex. You can have too much of any powerful thing. You got to keep it within the bounds, right, of safety. Warren Buffett also has something called a margin of safety.
I'm so glad you said the duplex thing, because that was my first deal. I was wondering, should I have started bigger? So thank goodness that was my first rental that I bought. Position, yeah. What's one step someone can take this week to better understand and control their use of risk and leverage? What's an action step that someone could do?
God, there's any number. One would be look at your financial statement and say, am I positioned to reward or am I positioned to risk right now? Right? Look at your financial statement. If you have no leverage, you're missing the boat. You're eating raw meat instead of cooking your food. You're playing in the dark instead of lighting your way. You're freezing to death where you could have warmth. You could have a much better life. You look at life for mankind with fire and without. With fire is better. There's just no question. So if you're not using any leverage at all, you're not moving as fast as you could move. But there's a happy medium to that. If you look at your financial statement, there's something called a stress test. And banks do this all the time. As they go through a stress test, they say, if these bad things happened, would we be okay? Well, Marcy and I, we do a stress test too. We say, if this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, would we be okay? You follow? For example, we don't refi we're shorting the dollar when we have debt. So we don't refi our properties as often as we would be able to, because we could refi them all the time and we could run it at max debt. But we prefer a margin of safety where we still always will carry some debt on those rentals. And when the equity grows to a point where it's ridiculous, now we're not doing the best we could do. We'll do a refi, but we won't do it so aggressively that we're running too hot. For example, what if rents fell 30%? A lot of people be underwater and now they can't pay. What if they fell 10%? A lot of people would be underwater and couldn't pay. So they got all these rental properties, hundreds of them, and they're running this with this much margin of safety. Well, Marcy and I look at it, and if rents fell over half, we'd still be okay. So we're still leveraged, we're still using debt, but there could be a huge drop in rents. We'd still be fine. So that's kind of a stress test you could do. But if you're not that far along, you know what the step is. Let's go to stockcastbonus.com, go there, start learning stuff, start learning things, and understand there's a vast ocean of knowledge waiting for you. Not just this lesson on position sizing or debt or position sizing to risk instead of reward. There's an ocean of risk management out there for you.
There we go. I love that, Andy. Well, that wraps up our show. Leverage can be a wealth multiplier or a wealth destroyer. The difference comes down to education, discipline, and strategy. Big thanks to Andy Tanner for always making the complex simple. If you're ready to get smarter about your own risk and rewards, go to stockcastbonus.com. You'll receive free tools and resources to help you to trade more confidently and avoid the mistakes most investors make. And if this episode helped you, like, subscribe, share it with someone who's thinking about using margin or leverage. You're not here by accident. You're building something that most people won't. So stay smart, stay invested, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Del.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.